We'd like to send our warm greetings and heartfelt thanks to all of you for always supporting us. Your encouragement through subscribing, liking, sharing, and commenting is a tremendous motivation for us to keep sharing meaningful stories. We sincerely hope to continue receiving your precious affection. Now, let's dive into today's tale. As dawn broke, the sky hung heavy with gray clouds, signaling a day far from bright. Thick clouds blanketed the horizon, and occasional gusts of cold wind carried the damp scent of earth and sky. The distant crow of a rooster mingled with the rustling of leaves. In a small house nestled amidst a quiet field, Lila stirred awake silently. She pulled a thin blanket over herself before slipping out of bed. Lila, a young woman with a face that bore the marks of early maturity, slipped on an old wool sweater and stepped into the kitchen. The modest space was tidy, its simple utensils neatly arranged. She set a pot of water on the stove, the flickering flames reflecting in her weary eyes. Another rainy day, she sighed softly to herself. From the outer room, Mr. Harold, her father-in-law, emerged. His frame was weathered, his hair streaked with silver. He cleared his throat to announce his presence. Lila turned, offering a faint smile. "Up early today, Dad," she said. "I'm heating water. I'll make you some tea soon." Mr. Harold nodded and pulled a wooden chair to the small table. Watching her work, his heart felt heavy. Ever since his son, Ethan, left to work abroad, the house had been just the two of them. Though he tried to keep Lila from feeling alone, he knew the void Ethan left was vast. "Any word from Ethan lately?" he asked, his voice warm yet tinged with concern. Lila paused, then replied, "He called a few weeks back. Said work's keeping him busy over there. It might be a while before he's home." She kept her tone steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. Mr. Harold fell silent, searching for comforting words. Finally, he said, "Ethan's working hard for this family. We've got to stay strong here, all right? If anything's tough, just tell me." Lila managed a small, strained smile. "I'm fine, Dad. As long as you're healthy, that's enough." But inside, her heart sank. She missed the days with Ethan, cooking together, tending the garden, or simply talking under the moonlight. Now, those were just memories. Loneliness was unavoidable. Outside, rain began to patter down. Lila brought a steaming teapot to the table, its gentle aroma softening the chilly air. "Here, Dad, have some tea. I'll check the chickens. Don't go out in this rain, okay?" "I can handle it," Mr. Harold protested, but Lila insisted, "I'm used to it." She donned a raincoat and stepped into the yard, raindrops tapping on leaves as she walked to the coop. Her eyes occasionally drifted to the gloomy sky. "It'll rain all day," she murmured. Back inside, Mr. Harold sat alone, gazing out the window. He remembered livelier times, Ethan teasing him, Lila bustling in the kitchen with hearty family meals. Now, the house felt emptier. When Lila returned, she swapped her raincoat, washed her hands, and prepared breakfast. Simple white porridge with a sprinkle of fresh scallions, enough to warm them through the cold day. "It's ready, Dad. Eat while it's hot," she said. Mr. Harold looked at the steaming bowl and nodded. "Thank you, Lila. You work too hard." She brushed it off with a shy smile. "It's what I'm supposed to do." They ate quietly, the rain's steady rhythm their only companion. Words were few, but they both knew the other's presence was their greatest comfort. After breakfast, Lila stared out at the rain while Mr. Harold grabbed an old jacket to check the fields. Before leaving, he turned to her. "It's cold today, stay warm. Leave any heavy work for me." Lila nodded, though guilt tugged at her. She knew he was aging, yet he still shouldered so much to spare her. The rain poured relentlessly into the afternoon, wind whistling through the windows, deepening the house's gloom. While Mr. Harold tended the rice fields, Lila stayed home, tackling chores, hanging laundry, cleaning, prepping dinner. But something felt off. Her head spun, her hands trembled as she gripped a rag. She leaned against the table, breathless. "I'm fine, just tired," she told herself. Yet the exhaustion grew heavier. By dusk, Mr. Harold returned, his jacket soaked. Seeing Lila still at work, he frowned. "Rest, I'll finish up," he said firmly but kindly. She forced a weak smile. "Almost done, Dad. You rest." Noticing her pale face, he pressed, "You don't look well." "Are you sick?" "Just a headache," she reassured him, though he wasn't convinced. After a simple dinner, Lila excused herself to rest. Mr. Harold watched her go, unease settling in. That night, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof. Lila lay in bed, fever blazing through her, limbs icy despite the blankets. Too weak to call out, she curled up, hoping it would pass. In the outer room, Mr. Harold couldn't sleep. Her tired face haunted him. Something urged him to check on her. "Lila, you asleep?" he knocked softly. No answer. Worried, he entered. The dim lamp revealed her flushed face, her breathing shallow. He touched her forehead, scorching. "Fever's too high," he muttered, rushing for a damp cloth and warm water. Under the faint light, Mr. Harold sat by her side, wiping her forehead. He brewed ginger tea to ease her fever. Lila stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Dad." "I'm okay. Don't worry," she rasped. "Quiet," he scolded gently. "You're burning up. Why didn't you call me? What if something happened?" Her faint smile wavered, tears glistening. "I didn't want to bother you." For years, she'd carried everything alone since Ethan left, never complaining or leaning on anyone. "You're too stubborn," Mr. Harold said softly. "There's just us two here. If we don't rely on each other, who will we turn to? Whatever happens, I'm here." His words soothed her aching heart. Lila closed her eyes, feeling safer. Late into the night, rain still falling, Mr. Harold stayed by her side. In her fevered haze, she mumbled, "I miss Ethan." Mr. Harold froze, his gaze tender yet pained. He understood her loneliness. His own had lingered since his wife's death, worsened by Ethan's absence. "He'll be back soon," he whispered, comforting them both. "He's always thinking of you and this family." Lila stirred again. "Dad, am I selfish for wanting him home?" "I know he's working for our future." Mr. Harold looked at her, feeling her turmoil. "No, it's not wrong to miss him. Anyone apart would feel the same. But Ethan's away for us. Be patient. I'll handle things here." The next morning, the rain ceased. Sunlight slipped through the window as Lila woke, feeling lighter. Beside her, Mr. Harold dozed, slumped in a chair. Touched, she quietly made tea and set it before him. The clink woke him. "Dad, drink this." "I'm better now, no need to worry," she said gratefully. He smiled. "Good to hear. But next time, don't hide it." That night, a fiercer storm rolled in thunder rumbling, lightning flashing. In the kitchen, Lila tidied up after dinner while Mr. Harold sipped tea, gazing at the deluge. "Rest, Lila. This rain's too much, sleep early," he broke the silence. She wiped her hands, smiling. "Almost done, Dad." "I'm used to late nights." He sighed. "You're worn out. Don't push too hard. Leave the heavy stuff to me." She nodded quietly, finishing up. Near midnight, as the rain raged, Lila spiked a sudden fever. Shivering under blankets, she struggled to fetch water, but collapsed, her legs buckling. The thud roused Mr. Harold. He rushed to her room, finding her on the floor, clutching her head. "Lila, what's wrong?" he cried, lifting her. "Just dizzy," she whispered, but her skin blazed. "This fever's bad. We're going to the hospital," he declared. "No, Dad, the rain." "I'll manage," she protested weakly. Ignoring her, he grabbed a raincoat and the motorbike. Lila couldn't stand, so he carried her, shielding her from the storm. The muddy rural road was treacherous in the dark, his hands trembling from cold and fear. She leaned against his back, his labored breaths reassuring her. "Dad, I'm sorry for troubling you," she murmured. "Nonsense," he replied firmly. "Family's for leaning on." His words warmed her as they braved the rain. At the hospital, after treatment, Lila stabilized. Morning broke clear, sunlight filtering into her room. She woke to find Mr. Harold asleep beside her, exhaustion etched into his wrinkled face. "Dad," she called softly. He jolted awake. "You're up. How do you feel?" "Much better, thanks to you," she said, eyes misty. "If not for you, I don't know." He waved it off. "You're safe now. Don't push yourself again. I'm here, got it." Back home, the air felt fresh after the storm. That evening, in the cozy kitchen, Lila set tea before Mr. Harold. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you," she said. He shook his head. "No thanks needed. I just want you happy. That's what Ethan wants too." Tears welled as she confessed, "I feel so weak sometimes. I try to be strong, but it's hard." He rested a hand on her shoulder. "You don't always have to be strong. Lean on me when you're tired." "You're not alone." Their bond deepened, not just duty, but a shared understanding between two souls weathering hardship. Yet, something strange stirred, a closeness blurring lines. It wasn't merely familial care, it was a quiet yearning born of mutual loneliness. One sunny morning, Lila tended the garden as Mr. Harold approached. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Yes, Dad." "I've troubled you too much," she replied. He shook his head. "Taking care of you is my job. Don't dwell on it." She hesitated, then said, "Dad, don't you ever get tired of carrying everything?" He sighed, gazing into the distance. "Sure, but tiredness isn't the worst. It's having no one to share it with. We've got each other, that's enough." That night over tea, Lila spoke suddenly. "Dad, what if I can't hold on to what's right? What would you think?" He frowned. "What's on your mind?" She faltered. "Sometimes I feel lost. I love Ethan, but the distance. I can't feel him anymore. I'm scared I'll fail him." Mr. Harold grew quiet, her words echoing his own buried feelings. He too had felt drawn to her beyond what was proper. "You're not to blame," he said. "Ethan should understand your loneliness. But I'm here, you won't face it alone." Another rainy evening, as they cooked together, Mr. Harold caught himself watching her, longing for a life less lonely. Lila turned, meeting his gaze, her heart racing. "Dad, why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, trembling. He shook his head. "Nothing. I just hate seeing you struggle. I want you happy." She looked away, torn. His care was real, but it stirred something dangerous. Later, alone, Lila stared at unsent messages to Ethan. She wanted to confess her confusion, but feared his judgment. A knock startled her. Mr. Harold stood there with a jacket. "It's stormy, windows closed?" "Yes, thanks, Dad," she said. He lingered, then said, "Whatever happens, hold on to your happiness. If it's too much, tell me, I'll help." Tears fell as she choked out, "Dad, I feel guilty. I know my thoughts are wrong, but I can't stop them." He stepped closer, hand on her shoulder. "No one's at fault for feeling alone. But think of Ethan, a family. I don't want you regretting this." His words snapped her back. She saw the truth. Her feelings, though real, couldn't cross that line. The next day, she called Ethan, pouring out her struggles, omitting Mr. Harold, and begged for change. He promised to return soon, rekindling her hope. Time passed. Lila and Mr. Harold settled into routine, their odd emotions fading into respect and understanding. One bright morning, as Lila worked in the garden, Mr. Harold smiled. "You're doing great. Everything will be fine, just keep going." Grateful, she nodded, knowing she could choose a path that honored her family.